So, this is the guide to completing a literature review. The first step is to define the research question, which is outlined in modules 1 and 2. You all have actually completed this because you've already written your PICO statement, but generally, when we define our research question, we pick our topic that we're interested in. We write a list of different questions that relate to that topic that might allow us to expand our understanding of that topic. And then we can write our PICO statement and our problem statement. So, our problem statement is generally why the PICO statement is going to be necessary. So, it's using um, evidence, statistics, things like that to state this is a problem, and here is what we're going to look into about it, which would then be your PICO statement. The second step is to create your research plan, and the information related to this is outlined in Module 3. So, this is when you plan on how you would like to do the literature review. So, how many search engines are you using? What's your timeline for when you would like to have it completed by? Who's doing what? So, are you going to have some people doing the actual research, some people analyzing the research, and other people summarizing it? Or are you going to each find an article and contribute that? As far as the search engines go, there's a couple that we typically recommend in nursing. For example, CINAHL is the database specific to nursing research. We can also use Medline Plus or Abisco. Those are both medical related ones. There are other ones that might be helpful related to your specific topic. So, like, I know some people might be using Psych Info. If you're looking for theses or scholarly projects that haven't yet quite been translated into peer reviewed research, you can use Congren Library or ProQuest. So, there's a lot of different search engines that are out there. And it's important to look into that and see which engine is going to best give you the information you need for your specific PICO question. So, then continuing with your search strategy, you want to define your key terms. So, in your PICO statement, you're going to identify the key words that are the fundamental part of your PICO question, and you're going to find the synonyms for each of those different words. So, for example, if nurse is one of your key words, you could use nurse, RN, registered nurse, caretaker, healthcare worker, etc. For patient, you can use patient, client, sick person, hospitalized. And the reason that you want to find the synonyms for the key terms is because when you search in a database, it doesn't always interpret what you're typing in. So, if an article talks about RNs, but you type in nurse, it might not give you that article that states RN. So, what we do is we identify the different synonyms and then we go through and we actually search the question over and over again, using different variations of those terms to get a more extensive understanding of the research. So, with that, typically we go for something called saturation, where when you do these searches, you're just finding the same articles or the same information. Because this is a smaller project, I'm not expecting you all to reach saturation, but that is how you would go about it. Another thing to keep in mind are the mesh and the Boolean terms. These are specific to specific search engines, and it's different search strategies and techniques. So, for example, if you use quotations, that will give you specifically what you're typing in. If you use an asterisk in a STEM word, it might give you all of the variants of that word. So if I did child asterisk, it might also include children, or I can't think of another variation of child, but that would be examples of how that would work. And like I said, you want to make sure that you search for the different terms because it's going to be different in each of the different search engines. And then once you have completed your literature search, you can break it down into the different steps that you use for that. So, for example, this is a flow sheet where you start off with the number of databases you use, number of articles you used, and then for each one, you identify your inclusion and exclusion criteria, and that N, or the number of articles, will slowly get smaller and smaller. So it's important to look at your inclusion and exclusion criteria. Like, do you want full text only, in English only? That relates to inpatient only. And eventually you want your N to be about 4 to 6 for this project. Um, your method should be replicable, meaning this table should be clear cut enough that if I go in and I do the exact same steps that you did, I get the same results. So after you've done that, you're going to evaluate your literature. So you can do a quantitative critique if it's dealing with numeric numbers, or a qualitative critique if it's working with more interview based questions. And you will turn in these critiques with your poster. So it'll be Appendix E and F of your poster, which is outlined in Module 12. And the quantitative critique is explained in Modules 5, 6, and 9, whereas the qualitative critique is explained in Modules 7, 8, and 9. One technique that you can do, oh, I'm sorry, going back over here. The quantitative and qualitative critique basically follows this process. So, first, you identify what the phenomenon is to be understood. Based on the phenomenon, will determine what type of measurements and what type of critique you're doing. Um, and then based on that, you want to look at the hypothesis question and see if it makes sense based on what they're studying. As far as the statistical techniques go, this is getting a lot more into grad school level. So I don't necessarily understand you to be like, oh, hey, they used SPSS when they didn't mean to. But I do want you to be able to look at the statistics and say, does it make sense? Is it relevant? And is it valid? And then you want to look and make sure there's no biases in the research. And you want to also determine if the changes and improvements in nursing can be made based on the results of this article. So, one thing that you will be doing is an annotated bibliography, and the information on this is found in Module 11. And this is one way to evaluate that literature. And you can use this as your quantitative or qualitative critique as well. So, basically, with the annotated bibliography, you're going to provide a brief summary of the source. You're going to identify the source's strengths and weaknesses, any conclusions that the authors made, why the source is relevant for your field of study, its relationship to other studies that you look at. So, do they agree? Do they disagree? Do they offer the same information? Do they build off of each other? You're also going to identify an evaluation of the methodology that they used. And then, as far as information about the author's background goes, I don't find that as important unless the author has a different background than what they're studying. So, if you have someone that is an expert in duck hunting that is doing a study on CHF, you would want to know, why is this person qualified to do this research? So, if that's the case, then you would offer information about the author's background, but generally you wouldn't need to. And then your personal conclusions about the article. After you evaluate it, you can synthesize it. So I think that the easiest way to do it is through a literature matrix, which you see here on this slide. And this is when you organize the sources into the different rows. And then each column looks at different aspects of that article. So you can fill in the purpose statement, the design, the sample, the methods, so on and so forth. So that way you have it all written out in a table form so you can compare and contrast the different articles. Another way that you can approach this is you can use the key terms of each of your parts of your PICO statement as the columns. So, for example, when I did my doctoral project, it was on patient to nurse sexual harassment. So my columns up here were like, what contributes or what increases the risk of sexual harassment in nursing? What is the effect on the patient? What is the effect on the nurse? What is the effect on the organization? What's the recommendations to address it? So you can kind of pick and choose what you put in the columns to best analyze that information for what you need it for. There are other ways you can approach a synthesis. You can literally lay out all your annotated bibliographies and just look for similarities and differences and do it that way. There's a couple of other tools as well, but basically what you're looking at is, what are the key themes of the articles, summarize the results, and offer any recommendations. And this part will be Appendix G of your final project. And then the last phase of your literature review is the dissemination. Typically, when you do a literature review, it will be a written review, which is usually a paper in APA format that includes an introduction, the methods, a critique and analysis, a discussion, any recommendations, and analysis of the strengths and limitations. For this project, you're actually going to be doing a poster presentation, though, so you don't have to worry about a written literature review. But all of these different categories of the literature review that you would put in the paper are going to be translated onto the poster. Madonna does have a specific um, poster template that you can use. And your literature review is going to be one of these squares for that. It's also going to drive our ability to create the methods and support our PICO statement. So that is the brief overview of the literature review. If you all need to meet to discuss it further, if you have any questions, just let me know and we can go from there.